The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched upward, like a hollow mountain. Thousands of seats rose in circles around the central platform, filled with representatives from hundreds of species. Light filtered through crystal walls that showed the stars beyond. This was Nexus Prime, the heart of galactic civilization, where every major decision had been made for 10,000 years. Ambassador Elena Vance stood alone on the central platform. She was a small figure in this vast space, a single human woman surrounded by aliens who had ruled the stars since before her species had discovered fire. Her gray hair was pulled back tight. Her face showed no expression. In her hands, she held a data crystal that contained evidence of crimes that would shake the galaxy, if anyone bothered to believe her. The Velthari delegation sat in the highest seats, looking down at her with obvious amusement. They were tall beings, nearly 3 meters in height, with skin like polished bronze and eyes that glowed soft yellow. For 6,000 years, the Velthari Dominion had been one of the 3 ruling powers of the Council. They controlled 1,000 star systems. They commanded the largest military fleet in known space, and for the past decade, they had been secretly destroying human colonies on the frontier. Elena activated the data crystal. Holographic images filled the air above her, showing burned cities and mass graves. The evidence was clear and terrible. Velthari warships bombing civilian centers, Velthari soldiers herding humans into labor camps, children separated from parents, the old and sick left to die. Over 2 million humans enslaved or killed across 17 colony worlds. The chamber fell silent as the images played. Some representatives looked away. Others watched with expressions of shock or horror. But the Velthari delegation simply waited, their glowing eyes betraying nothing. When the images ended, Elena spoke. Her voice was calm and clear, carrying to every corner of the chamber through the translation systems. These crimes were committed over a period of 8 years. We brought our first complaints to this council 6 years ago. We were told to wait for an investigation. We waited. We brought more evidence 3 years ago. We were told the matter was complex. We waited again. Last year, we presented testimony from survivors. We were told there were proper channels to follow. She paused, looking up at the assembled representatives. We have followed every channel. We have respected every process. And while we waited, while we followed your rules, more of our people died. More of our children were taken. More of our worlds burned. The Velthari High Speaker rose from his seat. His name was Torvax, and he had held his position for over a century. He was old even by Velthari standards, but his voice remained strong and filled with contempt. The human ambassador presents dramatic images, but where is the proof that Velthari forces were responsible? These frontier worlds are dangerous places. Pirates and raiders attack constantly. Perhaps humanity should focus on protecting its own colonies instead of making accusations against its betters. A ripple of nervous laughter moved through parts of the chamber. The Velthari had many allies who owed them favors or feared their anger. These allies knew which way to react. Elena did not respond to the laughter. She simply touched her data crystal again. New images appeared, showing Velthari military ships with clear identification codes, communications intercepts with orders signed by Velthari commanders, financial records showing payments to officials who looked the other way. The evidence is complete, Elena said. The perpetrators are identified. The chain of command is documented all the way to the Dominion's highest military council. This was not the work of pirates. This was a systematic campaign of conquest and genocide, approved at the highest levels of Velthari government. The chamber buzzed with whispered conversations. Many representatives had suspected something like this for years. The Velthari had grown aggressive lately, pushing boundaries everywhere. But suspecting was different from seeing proof displayed before the entire galaxy. High Speaker Torvax laughed. It was a cold sound, like metal scraping stone. And what does humanity propose to do about these alleged crimes? Your species has been part of this council for 60 years. In that time, you have contributed nothing but trade goods and complaints. Your fleet consists of a few hundred small vessels. Your military technology is generations behind even the minor powers. Do you plan to threaten us with your cargo ships? More laughter from the Velthari allies. Elena waited for it to fade. I am not here to threaten anyone, she said. I am here to deliver an ultimatum and a choice." The laughter stopped. Even the Velthari looked surprised. Small species did not deliver ultimatums to galactic powers. It simply was not done. Elena continued, her voice still calm, almost gentle. "The United Human Confederacy demands the following. First, all Velthari forces will withdraw from human space within 30 standard days. Second, all human captives will be returned to their families. Third, the Velthari Dominion will pay reparations to the victims and their descendants. Fourth, those responsible for ordering these crimes will face justice before an independent tribunal." Torvax spread his arms wide, a gesture of mock disbelief. "And if we refuse these absurd demands? What then, little ambassador? Will you send your cargo ships to attack us?" "If these demands are not met within 30 standard days," Elena said, "the United Human Confederacy will consider the peace accord void. All treaties, all agreements, all obligations between our peoples will end, and we will resolve this matter ourselves by our own methods." The chamber erupted in noise. Some representatives shouted in outrage at humanity's arrogance. Others called for order. The Velthari delegation laughed openly, slapping their seats in amusement. Torvax raised a hand for silence. When the noise faded, he looked down at Elena with something close to pity. "I have lived for 400 years, human. I have seen species rise and fall. I have watched empires crumble. And in all that time, I have never heard anything so foolish. Your species is a footnote in galactic history. You have no power, no allies, no hope of standing against us. If we wished, we could burn every human world in a single campaign. We tolerate you because you are useful as traitors, and because crushing you would be more trouble than you are worth." He leaned forward, his yellow eyes bright with contempt. "Go home, little ambassador. Tell your leaders that their threats amuse us. Tell them that if they continue this foolishness, we will stop tolerating them. And tell them that when we decide to take the rest of your worlds, there will be no warnings and no ultimatums. There will only be silence where humanity used to be." Elena stood motionless through this speech. When Torvax finished, she nodded slowly, as if confirming something she had already known. "I will relay your response to my government, but first I wish to address the council as a whole." She turned in a slow circle, looking at each delegation in turn. Her gaze lingered on species that had remained silent, who had not joined the laughter, who had watched the evidence with troubled expressions. For 60 years, humanity has been a faithful member of this council. We have honored every treaty. We have paid every fee. We have followed every rule. We believe that this system, for all its flaws, represented something worth preserving. A way for different species to live together without constant war. A path toward something better than the endless cycles of conquest and revenge. She paused, and when she spoke again, there was sadness in her voice. "We were wrong. This system does not protect the weak. It protects the strong. It allows powerful species to prey upon smaller ones while the rest look away. It turns justice into a process that never ends and never delivers." Elena looked up at the Velthari delegation one final time. "You have 30 days. What happens after that is your choice, not ours. We offered peace. We begged for justice. You laughed at us. Remember that, when the time comes. Remember that we tried everything else first." She turned and walked toward the exit. The chamber was silent now, the laughter gone. Something in her voice, in the way she moved, had changed the mood. Even the Velthari watched her go with expressions that were not quite as confident as before. At the door, Elena paused and looked back. "One more thing. To those species who have treated humanity with fairness and friendship over the years, we thank you. Whatever happens next, know that we remember kindness as clearly as we remember cruelty. Our quarrel is not with you." Then she was gone. The council erupted into debate that lasted for hours. Eventually, they voted to form another committee to investigate the matter further. The Velthari declared the issue closed and warned other species against interfering in their affairs. Most delegations simply wanted to forget the whole unpleasant scene. Nobody noticed when Elena Vance boarded her shuttle and sent a coded transmission to a ship waiting beyond the system's edge. The message was short, only 3 words. They refused. Begin. Far away, across human space, lights began to blink on consoles that had been dark for decades. Machines that had waited in silence began to wake. And humanity, which had hidden its true face for 60 patient years, began to take off its mask. The clock was now running, and the galaxy had no idea what was coming. In the days that followed Ambassador Vance's ultimatum, the galaxy tried to return to normal. The news networks discussed the incident briefly before moving on to other stories. Velthari officials gave interviews where they laughed about human arrogance. Most species simply forgot about the whole affair, confident that nothing would come of it. Then strange things began to happen. It started with small disruptions that nobody connected at first. Human merchant vessels, which had carried goods between stars for decades, began to withdraw from Velthari space. At first, the Velthari barely noticed. Humans were minor traders after all. There were plenty of other species willing to transport cargo, but within a week, the absence became painful. It turned out that human ships had been carrying more than anyone realized: rare medicines, specialized components, luxury goods that wealthy Velthari had come to depend upon. Prices began to rise. Shortages appeared. The economy started to feel the strain. When Velthari merchants tried to contact human trading companies to negotiate their return, they found only silence. Communication channels that had worked for years now went unanswered. It was as if every human in Velthari space had simply vanished overnight. On Nexus Prime, the Galactic Council experienced its own problems. The secure communication network that connected all member species began to experience strange errors. Messages arrived corrupted or delayed. Encryption systems failed randomly. The best technicians in the galaxy worked around the clock to fix the problems, but they could find no cause. The system simply would not cooperate. Some junior officials suggested that the timing was suspicious. Perhaps the humans were responsible. Their superiors dismissed such talk as paranoid. Everyone knew humans did not have the technical skill for such attacks. The failures were just coincidence, probably caused by aging equipment. Then a Velthari military convoy disappeared. It was a standard patrol mission, 12 warships traveling through a sector near human space. They entered hyperspace as scheduled. They never emerged. Search parties found nothing. No wreckage, no emergency signals, no survivors. The ships were simply gone, along with their 3,000 crew members. The Velthari High Command was troubled but not alarmed. Strange things happened in hyperspace sometimes. Old routes became unstable. Navigation errors occurred. It was tragic but not unheard of. When a second convoy vanished 2 days later, alarm began to spread. High Speaker Torvax demanded answers from his military commanders. They had none to give. Their scouts searched every sector along the convoy routes. They found only empty space. It was as if the ships had never existed. Quietly, without public announcement, the Velthari began to avoid hyperspace routes that passed near human territory. They told themselves this was just a precaution. They told themselves it had nothing to do with the human ultimatum. But the fear was there now, a cold whisper that would not go away. On Nexus Prime, Ambassador Vance continued to attend council sessions. She said nothing. She simply sat in the human delegation's small section and watched. Other representatives began to notice her presence in a way they never had before. Her silence was more disturbing than any speech. The Nexari delegate, a being of light and crystal named Illumina, finally approached Vance during a recess. The Nexari were an old species, wise and careful. They had survived for millions of years by paying attention to things others missed. "Ambassador Vance," Illumina said, her voice like wind chimes. "May I speak with you privately?" Elena nodded and followed the Nexari to a quiet alcove overlooking the stars. "Something is happening," Illumina said. "The Velthari are frightened, though they hide it well. Trade routes are disrupted, military convoys vanish. The Council's communications fail in ways our engineers cannot explain. And through it all, your people say nothing and do nothing obvious. It is deeply unsettling." "Is there a question in there somewhere?" Elena asked. Illumina's crystal body shifted through colors that indicated concern. What is humanity doing? And more importantly, what is humanity? Elena was silent for a long moment, looking out at the stars. "For 60 years, we have been exactly what the galaxy expected us to be. Traders, diplomats, a minor species with limited technology and no real power. We played our role perfectly. We made everyone comfortable. And now? Now the mask is starting to slip. Elena turned to face the Nexari delegate. Illumina, your species is old enough to know that appearances can deceive. You survived because you never assumed you understood everything. The Velthari survived because they were strong enough to crush anyone who challenged them. But strength and wisdom are not the same thing. Are you saying humanity has been hiding something? Elena smiled, and there was something in that smile that made Illumina's crystal form dim slightly. I'm saying that in 12 days the ultimatum expires. Between now and then, I suggest the Nexari keep their distance from Velthari space, not because we bear your species any ill will, but because what happens next will be significant. She walked away, leaving Illumina alone with questions that had no comfortable answers. The strange events continued. Velthari intelligence networks, which had spent centuries building webs of informants across the galaxy, began to collapse. Agents went silent. Sources stopped reporting. Information that had flowed freely for generations simply dried up. When Velthari spy masters investigated, they discovered something disturbing. Many of their most valuable informants had been human or had worked closely with humans. These people had not been arrested or killed. They had simply vanished, as if they had never existed. Database records were corrupted. Identity files were gone. It was like trying to grab smoke. Even more troubling were the reports from Velthari worlds. Citizens began to notice humans everywhere they went, in markets, in transit stations, in parks and public spaces. The humans did nothing threatening. They simply watched. They were always watching with calm eyes that revealed nothing. Military commanders ordered security sweeps. The humans they detained were all legal visitors with proper documentation. There was no law against standing in public spaces and observing. The Velthari had to release them. Feeling foolish and frustrated, on the occupied human worlds, the captive populations grew quieter. They stopped resisting. They stopped complaining. The Velthari guards found this more disturbing than open rebellion. The humans worked in the labor camps without protest, but there was something in their eyes, a patience that felt like a promise. They know something, one guard reported to his superiors. They know something we don't, and they're waiting for it. The Velthari High Council held an emergency session. For the first time, some members suggested that perhaps they should consider the human ultimatum seriously. Perhaps returning a few captives would calm the situation. Perhaps some show of goodwill would end the unsettling incidents. Torvax crushed these suggestions with cold fury. We are the Velthari Dominion, he declared. We do not negotiate with lesser species. We do not show weakness. The humans are playing psychological games because they have no real power. If we give them anything now, every minor species in the galaxy will think they can make demands of us. He slammed his fist on the table. In 12 days, their ultimatum expires. Nothing will happen because nothing can happen. Humanity is bluffing. When their deadline passes and nothing changes, the galaxy will see them for the fools they are. Their reputation will be destroyed. And then, when the moment is right, we will finish what we started. We will burn every human world and scatter their species across the stars as slaves. The council members nodded, reassured by their leader's confidence. Torvax was never wrong. He had guided the Dominion for a century. He knew what he was doing. On the day before the ultimatum expired, the galaxy held its breath without knowing why. Something felt different in the air of 1,000 worlds. Something was coming. Elena Vance spent that final day in her quarters on Nexus Prime. She spoke to no one. She wrote messages to family members she would never send. She looked at photographs of worlds she might never see again. At midnight, Galactic Standard Time, her communication console lit up. A single message arrived from United Human Confederacy Command. All assets in position, all systems ready, awaiting final authorization. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were hard and clear. Authorization confirmed, she transmitted. Execute Operation Revelation. Far away in the darkness between stars, something began to move. Ships that had hidden for decades powered up their engines. Weapons that had never been fired charged their systems. Humanity's true face was about to be revealed, and the galaxy would never be the same. The next morning, Elena walked onto the council floor for the last time as an ambassador of peace. She carried no data crystals this time. She had nothing left to prove, nothing left to ask for. A single human ship had appeared in orbit above Nexus Prime during the night. It hung in space like a black knife, sleek and angular, utterly unlike any human vessel anyone had ever seen. The Velthari had scrambled a dozen warships to intercept it. They now orbited at a respectful distance, their crews too frightened to approach. The ship broadcast a single message to the entire galaxy, transmitted on every frequency and in every language. The peace accord as it pertains to humanity is hereby dissolved. We offered peace. You chose otherwise. May history remember that we tried. In the council chamber, Torvax rose to deliver a contemptuous response. He never got the chance. Because in that moment, the reports began flooding in from Velthari space. Reports of human ships appearing from nowhere. Reports of weapons that made no sense. Reports of an enemy that had been waiting, invisible, for 60 long years. The war had begun, and humanity was done pretending. Admiral Korath stood on the bridge of the Velthari flagship Eternal Dominion and watched his fleet assemble. 300 capital ships, the pride of the Dominion's navy, gathered in formation above the colony world of Theron 4. Thousands of smaller vessels surrounded them, like schools of fish around great whales. It was the largest military force deployed in a generation. The humans had taken Theron 4 3 days ago. They had somehow appeared from nowhere, disabled the planetary defense grid, and landed troops that liberated the labor camps before anyone understood what was happening. Now they held the world with a garrison that orbital scans estimated at less than 10,000 soldiers. Korath had been ordered to retake Theron the Fort and crush the human forces completely. The High Council wanted a display of overwhelming power that would end this conflict before it truly began. They wanted the galaxy to see what happened to species that challenged Velthari dominance. All ships report ready, Admiral, his second-in-command reported. The fleet is at full combat strength. Korath nodded with satisfaction. Even if the humans had somehow hidden advanced ships, they could not have many. His fleet would crush any defense they could muster. This battle would be over in hours. Begin the approach, he ordered. All ships advance on Theron 4. The massive fleet moved as one, engines blazing, weapons charged. Korath allowed himself a moment of pride. This would be the victory that secured his legacy. Future generations would remember the admiral who reminded the galaxy why the Velthari ruled. They were halfway to the planet when the sensor officer spoke, confusion clear in his voice. Admiral, we're detecting contacts emerging from hyperspace. Multiple signatures. They appear to be human. Korath turned to the main display. 12 ships had appeared between his fleet and Theron 4. They were small compared to Velthari capital ships, black and angular, moving with impossible grace. They looked like nothing in any database. Only 12? Korath laughed. They send 12 ships against 300? These humans are even more foolish than I thought. Admiral, I'm reading strange energy signatures from those vessels. Our sensors are having difficulty analyzing them. It doesn't matter. All ships, open fire. Destroy those insects. 300 Velthari warships unleashed their weapons. The void lit up with enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. Energy beams and missiles filled the space between the fleets, converging on the 12 human ships. The human ships did not even try to dodge. They flew straight into the barrage, and then something impossible happened. The weapons fire simply vanished. Energy beams bent around the human ships like water flowing around stones. Missiles stopped in mid-flight and fell dead. Not one weapon touched the black vessels. Korath stared at the display in disbelief. That's not possible. No shield technology could do that. Increased firepower. All weapons. Continuous fire. The Velthari fleet poured everything they had at the human ships. The result was the same. The weapons simply could not reach their targets. It was like trying to strike a shadow. Then the human ships returned fire. Korath never saw what hit them. There was no visible beam, no missile, no weapon signature at all. One moment his ships were firing. The next moment they were dying. The Eternal Dominion shuddered as systems all over the vessel failed simultaneously. Lights flickered, engines died, weapons went offline. The great flagship drifted helplessly, all power gone, except for emergency life support. Across the fleet, the same thing was happening everywhere. 300 warships, the mightiest force the Dominion had deployed in centuries, stopped working in less than 4 minutes. They floated in space like dead fish, their crews alive but utterly helpless. Korath gripped his command chair as emergency lighting cast red shadows across the bridge. His crew looked at him with fear in their eyes. "What happened?" his second-in-command whispered. "What did they hit us with?" Before Korath could answer, the communication system crackled to life. A human voice spoke, calm and clear. "Admiral Korath, this is Commander Sarah Chen of the United Human Confederacy vessel, Silent Thunder. Your fleet has been disabled. Your weapons are offline. Your engines are dead. You are not in danger if you remain calm. Life support will continue to function." Korath found his voice. "What have you done to my ships? What kind of weapons are these?" "Our weapons target systems, not people. We could have destroyed your fleet, Admiral. Every ship, every crew member. Instead, we chose to stop you without killing anyone. You might want to think about why we made that choice." The communication ended. Korath looked out the viewport at his crippled fleet, at the 12 black ships that had defeated them without breaking a sweat, and felt something he had not experienced in over a century of military service: fear. Across the occupied human worlds, similar scenes played out. Veltari ground forces had fortified their positions around the labor camps, expecting the humans to attack with conventional weapons. They had prepared defensive positions, heavy weapons emplacements, and overlapping fields of fire. None of it mattered. On Korath III, the largest labor camp held 50,000 human captives. Colonel Vexus commanded the garrison of 5,000 Velthari soldiers. When the human attack began, he was ready. Then his soldiers' weapons stopped working. Every rifle, every cannon, every explosive device simply failed. Power cells drained instantly. Mechanical systems locked up. In seconds, his entire garrison was armed with nothing but useless metal and plastic. Human soldiers appeared from nowhere, stepping out of thin air itself. They wore dark armor that seemed to swallow light. They moved through the Velthari positions like ghosts, disarming soldiers who could not even see them coming. Colonel Vexus found himself facing a human officer who had materialized 3 steps in front of him. The human was a woman, short by Veltari standards, with gray streaks in her dark hair. "You can order your soldiers to stand down," she said calmly, "or we can continue disarming them one by one. Either way, this camp will be liberated within the hour. The only question is whether your soldiers spend that hour conscious." Vexus stared at her. "How are you doing this? Our intelligence said humans had no advanced technology. We had complete information on your military capabilities." The human officer smiled slightly. "You had the information we wanted you to have. For 60 years, we showed the galaxy exactly what we wanted them to see. A minor species with limited technology and no real power. A footnote in galactic history, as your high speaker put it. It was all fake. Every ship we showed the Council, every weapon we demonstrated, every piece of technology we traded, all carefully chosen to make us look weak. The real human fleet, the real human technology, we kept hidden, waiting, hoping we would never need to use it." Vexus felt his certainty crumbling. "But why? Why pretend to be weak?" The officer's expression grew serious. "Because we remembered our own history. We remembered what happened when powerful nations encountered weaker ones on our own world. The conquest, the slavery, the genocide. We did those things to each other before we learned better. When we reached the stars and found other species, we had a choice. We could become the conquerors, or we could try something different." She gestured at the camp around them, at the human prisoners watching through the fences with tears streaming down their faces. "We chose to join the Council as equals. We hoped that peaceful coexistence was possible. We gave your galaxy 60 years to prove us right." Her voice hardened. "You proved us wrong. Your species enslaved our people, burned our worlds, laughed at our pleas for justice. So now you get to see what we really are." "What are you going to do to us?" Vexus asked. The officer looked at him for a long moment. "We're going to liberate our people. We're going to disable your weapons and your ships. And then we're going to stop at your border and wait. Wait for what? For your leaders to decide whether they want to continue this war or end it. We've shown you that we can destroy you if we choose. Now we're going to show you something else. Something that might be harder for you to understand. What's that? Mercy, she said. We're going to show you mercy. Not because you deserve it, but because that's who we choose to be. The camp gates opened. Human soldiers helped the captives walk to freedom, supporting those too weak to stand on their own. Velthari guards stood helpless, watching their prisoners leave, unable to stop them. Across the galaxy, the news spread like wildfire. The human victory was total and incomprehensible. The greatest Velthari fleet ever assembled had been defeated without a single death. Ground forces had been neutralized without bloodshed. Occupied worlds had been liberated with surgical precision. And then, strangest of all, the humans stopped. Their fleet halted at the border of Velthari core space. Their ground forces completed the liberation of the occupied worlds and went no further. They had demonstrated power beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen, and then they chose not to use it. On Nexus Prime, Ambassador Vance addressed a council chamber filled with stunned representatives. "You now see what we could have been all along," she said. "You now understand what we hid and why. We could have conquered this galaxy decades ago. We could have made every species kneel before us. Instead, we chose to live as one species among many. We chose peace over power." She paused, letting the words sink in. "We still choose peace. Our forces have stopped at the Velthari border. We will not invade their homeworlds. We will not destroy their civilization. We have taken back what was ours and nothing more. The war can end here, today, if the Velthari wish it." High Speaker Torvax, watching via communication link from his capital, spoke for the first time since the disaster. "And if we refuse? If we continue to fight?" Elena met his eyes through the screen. "Then we will defend ourselves. We will destroy every ship and every weapon you send against us. We will grind your military to dust while never setting foot on your worlds. And when you finally have nothing left to fight with, we will make the same offer we're making now. The only difference will be how many of your people die before you accept it." Torvak's face showed emotions no one had ever seen there before. Uncertainty, fear, and somewhere beneath them, the first stirrings of something that might have been respect. "You would truly spare us, after everything we did to your people?" "We would. Not because you deserve it, but because we refuse to become what you are. We refuse to let your crimes turn us into monsters. That is our choice. Now you have to make yours." The galaxy waited for the Velthari response, and for the first time in 6,000 years, no one knew what would happen next. The Velthari homeworld of Dominax Prime had never known fear. For 6,000 years, it had been the heart of an empire that conquered without consequence and ruled without challenge. Its cities gleamed with the wealth of 1,000 subject worlds. Its people walked with the confidence of masters who had never met their equals. Now fear lived in every street and every home. The news of the fleet's destruction had spread through the population like poison. 300 warships disabled without a single shot landing on target. Ground forces neutralized without bloodshed. Human captives walking free while Velthari soldiers stood helpless. It was impossible. It was humiliating. It was terrifying. High Speaker Torvax sat in his private chamber, surrounded by advisors who had no advice to give. The military commanders who had promised easy victory now stared at their feet. The intelligence officers who had sworn humans were weak now had nothing to say. The Empire's greatest minds had been wrong about everything. "How did we miss this?" Torvax demanded. 60 years they were among us. 60 years of trade and diplomacy. How did no one see what they truly were? General Corax, the senior military commander, spoke carefully. "Their deception was perfect, High Speaker. Every ship, every weapon, every piece of technology they showed us was designed to look primitive. They sacrificed trade advantages and political influence to maintain the illusion. We saw exactly what they wanted us to see." "But why? Why hide such power? Any species with that technology could have dominated the galaxy." "Perhaps that is exactly why they hid it," said a quiet voice. Everyone turned to look at the speaker. It was Sareth, the youngest member of the advisory council, barely 2 centuries old. She had been quiet throughout the crisis, watching and listening. "Explain," Torvax commanded. Sareth stood, her hands steady despite the weight of attention upon her. "High Speaker, I have spent the past days studying everything we know about human history. Their own records, which they shared freely as part of cultural exchange. Before they reached the stars, they nearly destroyed themselves multiple times. Wars that killed hundreds of millions. Weapons that could have ended their entire species." "Barbaric," one general muttered. "Perhaps," Sareth agreed, "but they learned from it. They developed a deep fear of what unchecked power could do. When they finally united and reached the stars, they had a choice. They could become conquerors as we did, or they could try something different." "They chose weakness," Torvax said dismissively. "No, High Speaker. They chose restraint. They hid their power because they feared what they might become if everyone knew about it. They wanted to prove that peaceful coexistence was possible. They wanted to believe that species could live together without one dominating the others." Sareth paused, choosing her next words carefully. "We proved them wrong. We took their people. We burned their worlds. We laughed at their pain. And still, even now, they offer us mercy. Does that sound like weakness to you?" The chamber fell silent. Torvax stared at Sareth with an expression no one could read. Finally, he spoke. "What would you have me do, young one? Accept their terms? Humble the Dominion before a species we enslaved?" "I would have you consider what happens if we don't," Sareth replied. "Their fleet sits at our border. They could have advanced. They could be bombing our cities right now. Instead, they wait. They offer peace. How long will they wait? How many of our people will die if we force them to fight?" General Korak slammed his fist on the table. "We cannot simply surrender. The Dominion does not bow to anyone." "The Dominion has never faced an enemy like this," Sareth shot back. "Our greatest fleet was destroyed in minutes. Our ground forces were neutralized without a shot fired. What exactly do you propose we fight them with? Harsh words?" The argument exploded across the chamber. Hawks demanded continued resistance, even if it meant the destruction of the Dominion. Moderates urged negotiation, pointing out that humanity's terms were harsh but survivable. Torvax listened to all of it, his ancient face revealing nothing. Finally, he raised a hand for silence. "We will respond to the human ultimatum tomorrow. Tonight, I wish to speak with their ambassador, alone." The request surprised everyone, but no one dared object. Messages were sent through diplomatic channels. Within hours, a human shuttle descended through Dominax Prime's atmosphere. Ambassador Vance arrived at the High Speaker's palace as night fell over the capital. She was escorted to Torvax's private garden, a vast space filled with alien plants collected from across the Empire. The High Speaker stood among his treasures, looking older than anyone had ever seen him. "Thank you for coming," he said. His voice held none of its usual contempt. "I admit I was surprised by the invitation," Elena replied. "A few days ago, you promised to scatter humanity across the stars as slaves. A few days ago, I was a fool." Torvax turned to face her. "I have ruled the Dominion for a century. I have commanded fleets and conquered worlds. I believe myself wise. I was merely powerful, which is not the same thing." Elena remained silent, waiting. "Your species confused me from the beginning," Torvax continued. "You were clearly intelligent, clearly capable, yet you never pushed for more power. You accepted minor positions. You traded fairly when you could have cheated. You followed rules that did not benefit you. I thought it was weakness. I thought you were simply too foolish to see opportunities. And now? Now I see that you were testing us, all of us, giving the galaxy a chance to prove that civilization could be more than a mask over savagery." Torvax's yellow eyes dimmed. "We failed that test spectacularly." "Yes," Elena said simply. "You did. Your terms. Withdrawal from occupied territories, which is already done. Return of all captives, which we are arranging. But the reparations, the tribunal for war crimes, these things will break us. Not militarily. You could do that whenever you wish. But culturally, the Dominion's entire identity is built on strength and dominance. To admit we were wrong, to pay for our crimes, to see our leaders judged by others, Many of my people will not survive that kind of humiliation. Elena studied the old Veltari for a long moment. Do you know how many humans died in your labor camps, High Speaker? Do you know how many children were separated from their parents? How many families were destroyed? How many dreams were crushed under Velthari boots? Torvax did not answer. Your people's humiliation does not compare to their suffering. But I understand what you're saying. You're asking if there is another way, a path that gives justice without destruction. Is there? Elena walked among the alien plants, touching their leaves gently. My government gave me authority to negotiate within certain boundaries. The core demands cannot change. The reparations will be paid. The war criminals will face justice. But there may be room to discuss how these things happen. She turned back to Torvax. The reparations could be paid over time in ways that rebuild rather than punish. Economic cooperation instead of pure extraction. The tribunals could include Velthari judges alongside human ones, showing that justice is shared rather than imposed. These modifications would be difficult to sell to my people, many of whom want to see the Dominion broken completely. But you would try? I would, because I meant what I said in the council chamber. We refuse to become what you were. Revenge would be easy. Justice is harder. Building something better is hardest of all. But that is who we are. Torvax was silent for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. In 400 years, I have never apologized for anything. I do not know if I know how. But I want you to understand something. The crimes against your people were real. The suffering was real. And for my part in allowing them, for my arrogance and cruelty, he struggled with the word. I am sorry. Elena looked at him. She saw the effort those words cost him. She saw the weight of centuries pressing down on ancient shoulders. That is a beginning, she said quietly. Only a beginning. But it is something. They talked through the night, two leaders from species that had nearly destroyed each other, trying to find a path towards something better. When dawn broke over Dominax Prime, they had the outline of an agreement. It would take months to finalize. It would face opposition from hardliners on both sides, but it was possible. As Elena prepared to leave, Torvax asked one final question. Why did you come here alone? I could have had you killed. My guards could have taken you hostage. Elena smiled slightly. Could they? Torvax thought about the ships that appeared from nowhere, the weapons that disabled entire fleets, the soldiers that materialized from thin air. Probably not, he admitted. I came because sometimes peace requires risk. Sometimes you have to trust that your enemy wants to be better than they have been. I chose to believe that about you, High Speaker. Please don't make me regret it. She walked out of the garden, leaving the old ruler alone among his conquered treasures. For the first time in centuries, Torvax felt something he could not name. It might have been hope. It might have been shame. It might have been the first stirrings of a desire to be worthy of the mercy he had been shown. The next day he addressed the Dominion and announced that negotiations for peace would begin. The reaction was mixed. Some cursed him as weak. Others wept with relief. But the war was over. Now the harder work could begin. The work of healing. The work of justice. The work of building a future where the strong did not automatically prey upon the weak. It would take years. It would take sacrifice. It would require the Velthari to become something they had never been before. But it was possible. And in that possibility lay the seed of something the galaxy had never seen. A peace built not on fear, but on the choice to be better. Humanity had shown the way. Now others would have to decide whether to follow. 3 months had passed since the war ended. The galaxy was still adjusting to its new reality. On Dominax Prime, the transition was painful. Hardliners within the Velthari military had attempted a coup against High Speaker Torvax, demanding that the war continue regardless of the cost. They had gathered supporters, seized communication centers, and broadcast calls for resistance across the empire. The coup lasted 16 hours. It was not the human fleet that ended it. The humans had kept their word and remained at the border, watching but not interfering. Instead, it was ordinary Velthari citizens who stopped the hardliners. Soldiers who refused to fire on their own people, officials who blocked the rebels' orders, and thousands of common people who filled the streets of the capital, demanding peace. They had seen what humanity was capable of. They had seen mercy where they expected destruction. And many of them, for the first time in their lives, had begun to wonder if there might be a better way to live. The coup leaders were arrested by their own troops. They would face justice alongside the architects of the human genocide. The tribunals were beginning their work, slow and careful, building cases that would stand the scrutiny of history. On the liberated human worlds, the work of healing had begun. The labor camps were being dismantled, their materials repurposed for housing and hospitals. Families separated by the occupation were being reunited through a massive effort that involved both human and Velthari resources. The reparations agreement had taken its final form. Instead of simple payments, it had become something more complex and more hopeful. The Velthari would invest in rebuilding the worlds they had destroyed, working alongside the humans who had suffered there. They would share technology and resources. They would create jobs and opportunities. It was not charity, and it was not punishment. It was partnership, forged in the ashes of war. Not everyone accepted this arrangement easily. On both sides, there were those who wanted simpler solutions. Some humans demanded the Dominion's complete destruction. Some Velthari refused to acknowledge that their species had done anything wrong. These voices were loud, but they were no longer the only voices. On Nexus Prime, the Galactic Council was undergoing its own transformation. The old structure, which had allowed powerful species to dominate weaker ones, was being rebuilt from the ground up. Ambassador Vance had led the effort, working with representatives from hundreds of species to create something better. The new charter included protections that had never existed before. No species could be denied representation. No species could be attacked without consequence. No species could enslave another. These rules had teeth now, because everyone knew what would happen if they were broken. Humanity was offered permanent leadership of the Council. They refused. "We didn't do this to become rulers," Elena explained to the assembled delegates. "We did this because ruling others is wrong. If we take control now, we become just another empire. Better intentioned, perhaps, but still an empire. And empires always fail eventually, usually after causing tremendous suffering. Instead, humanity proposed a rotating leadership, with every member species having an equal voice. They offered their advanced technology freely, with only one condition: it could not be used for conquest or domination. Any species that broke this rule would find itself facing the same response the Velthari had experienced. The galaxy accepted these terms. They had little choice. But many also accepted them willingly, recognizing that humanity was offering something that had never existed before. A chance to build a civilization based on cooperation rather than competition. A galaxy where the strong protected the weak instead of preying upon them. It would take generations to fully realize this vision. There would be setbacks and failures. Old habits would die hard, but the foundation had been laid. 1 year after the war, a memorial was dedicated on Kareth III, the site of the largest labor camp. The ceremony brought together humans and Velthari, survivors and the descendants of those who had died. Elena Vance stood before the crowd, looking at faces marked by grief and hope in equal measure. Behind her, a wall of black stone carried the names of every human who had died under Velthari occupation. There were too many names to read in a lifetime. They stretched across the stone like an accusation against the universe itself. Elena spoke slowly, her voice carrying across the silent gathering. "We are here to remember those who were taken from us, to remember the suffering they endured, to remember the injustice that was done in the name of power and conquest." She paused, looking at the Velthari delegates who had come to stand witness. "Some will say we should also be here to hate, to nurse our wounds and plan our revenge, to make sure that the species who did this to us suffers as we suffered." Elena shook her head. "Those voices are understandable. They come from pain that is real and deep, but they are wrong, because revenge is just another word for continuing the cycle. It means becoming what we hate. It means letting our enemies define who we are." She turned to face the memorial wall. "The people whose names are carved here did not die so that we could become monsters. They died because monsters already existed. Our job now is not to create more monsters. Our job is to build a galaxy where no one else has to die like this, where no child is torn from their parents, where no people are conquered and enslaved, where strength is used to protect, not to destroy. Elena looked back at the crowd. We could have burned the Velthari worlds. We had the power. Some of us wanted to, but we chose differently. We chose mercy, not because the Velthari deserved it, but because we refused to let their crimes corrupt our souls. We choose who we are. No one else gets to make that choice for us. She stepped aside and a young Velthari woman approached the memorial. Her name was Sareth, the advisor who had counseled peace when her own people wanted war. She carried a small container of soil from Dominax Prime. I represent the species that committed these crimes, she said quietly. I cannot undo what was done. I cannot bring back the dead. I can only promise that we will try to become something better, that we will learn from this terrible chapter in our history, that we will work every day to be worthy of the mercy we were shown. She knelt and placed the soil at the base of the memorial wall, a symbolic gesture. Velthari earth mixed with human soil. Two species bound together now, not by conquest, but by the hard work of healing. After the ceremony, Elena walked through the memorial garden that surrounded the wall. Human children played on the grass, chasing each other and laughing. Among them were several young Velthari, children of the diplomatic staff who had come for the ceremony. The children did not see enemies or victims. They saw only other children to play with. An old man approached Elena. He walked with difficulty, his body marked by years of hard labor in the camps. His name was Marcus Chen, and he had been one of the first prisoners taken when the occupation began. Ambassador, he said, I wanted to thank you. For what? For not giving us what we wanted. The old man smiled sadly. When I was in the camps, I dreamed of revenge. I imagined human ships burning Velthari cities. I imagined their people suffering as we suffered. I thought that would make things right. He watched the children playing together. But this is better. This is harder and slower and messier, but it's better. My grandchildren will grow up in a galaxy where this kind of thing doesn't happen anymore. They'll have Velthari friends. They'll see former enemies working together to build something new. That's worth more than any revenge could ever be. Elena put her hand on his shoulder. That's why we did it. Not for ourselves, but for them. For the ones who come after. Marcus nodded slowly. We learned it the hard way, didn't we? On our own world before we reached the stars. We nearly destroyed ourselves with our hatred. We had to climb out of that darkness one painful step at a time. And now we're trying to help others avoid the same mistakes. Do you think it will work? Elena looked at the children, at the memorial, at the sky full of stars that held 1,000 worlds working together for the first time in history. I think we have to try. I think trying is what makes us human. Not our technology, not our hidden fleets, just the stubborn refusal to give up on the possibility of something better. She smiled and there was peace in her eyes. We offered them a choice. They could destroy themselves trying to fight us, or they could join us in building a new future. They chose to build. And as long as species keep making that choice, as long as enough beings decide that cooperation is better than conquest, we have a chance. The sun set over Karath III, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The memorial wall glowed softly in the fading light. The names of the dead watched over the garden where their children's children played with the children of their former enemies. It was not a perfect ending. The galaxy still held darkness and danger. There would be more challenges, more tests of humanity's commitment to its ideals. The work of building a better civilization would never truly be finished. But it had begun, and sometimes beginning is enough. The stars came out over the memorial, cold and bright, watching as they had watched for billions of years. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had seen species destroy each other in endless cycles of violence. Now perhaps they were seeing something new, a species that chose mercy over revenge, a galaxy learning to be better than its past, a future being built one difficult day at a time. Humanity had not come to the stars seeking conquest. They had come seeking companions. And now finally they had found them. The journey was just beginning.